Shabbat Shalom. Today is the 42nd day of the Omer. 1 week until Shavuot. Next Shabbat will be the 49th day of the Omer. Today is the 42nd day of the Omer by our count. We count according to the ancient ways of the priesthood. Anyway, that's a different story. I talked about that in the first counting of the Omer series. Now, I'm talking about something today that I found out I really have no knowledge about. I feel kind of lost. I was lost last week with the prophet, but that came together very nicely. I felt much more comfortable as we got into it. I hope that happens this time, because this week we are talking about the teacher. And I thought I understood about the teacher. I didn't understand about the teacher. I knew a little bit, but I kind of missed the main point. And the main point is really, it's an exciting thing that I remember teaching about a few months ago. It might even have been last year, the end of last year. And it was about treasure hunt. It was about searching for treasure. Basically, you have to dig if you want to know God. God doesn't hand his relationship to us on a silver platter. It's a lot of work. You got to really dig if you want to have that. Well, this gift of the teacher is the one that does that better than any of the others. So remember our two passages linking Leviticus 23, the counting of the Omer, the 50 days or 49 days of the Omer, with the filling of the measure. That's the Omer, remember, is a measure that's filled every day for 49 days. And that's linking it with the filling of the measure in Ephesians chapter 4 about the 5 gifts. Leviticus 23, you shall count to yourself, from the day after the Shabbat, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, or the Omer of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete or perfect Sabbaths. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. And then in Ephesians chapter 4, to each one of us grace or a gift, to each one of us gift, charis, was given according to the measure of Messiah's grace or gift. They're sort of interchangeable terms. Therefore he gave gifts to man that he might fill all things. And he gave some apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to the building up of the body of Messiah, to a perfect man, to the measure of the fullness of Messiah. There's about 5 different words in that passage that are key words, clue words to tell us it's about the counting of the Omer. Gift is the first one, measure of Messiah's grace, measure, filling the measure. Therefore he gave gifts to men that he might fill all things. There it is again. And he gave some apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, 5 different gifts that are activities done in the temple, to the building up of the body of Messiah, to a perfect man, a tom man, 4, to the measure of the fullness of Messiah, or if we flip that, the filling of the measure of Messiah. So I guess there's 4. There's 4 different key words. And then the 2 phrases in Leviticus 23 that we key in on, uspartem lachem, you shall count to you. That means that during the counting of the Omer, we are being worked on. We are the Omer, the grain, being worked on. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that we are being worked on. Things are not, they're not happenstance, they're not chance. They are brought about in our life to work on us, to change us, so that we can see ourselves and we can work on ourselves and change ourselves. It's called a soul correction in Judaism, where we, try to become the best version of ourselves, so that as that Omer fills, it's perfect. It's perfect. At least in one thing, maybe 2. Shabbat Temimot, Sabbaths of complete they shall be. Sabbaths Temimot, Tam means perfect. So the processes that are done to the barley and then to the wheat is a perfecting and refining. And this itself is a perfecting and refining. Why? Because barley is a rough grain. It's used mostly for food for cattle. And then wheat is a much, much finer grain. And as the 49 days go, it starts with only barley harvest, and then the barley sort of tapers off, and the wheat starts coming up, and then it becomes a wheat, and then it's only wheat harvest by the time Shavuot comes, which means it goes from a less refined person to a more refined person. So just the grain itself is the same picture of us changing and growing and becoming refined. And again, this is not easy. It is not easy. It's hard. You got to think about it constantly when you're going through this stuff. When there's a confrontation, when you're thinking about your reaction or what you said or why you're going to say what you're going to say and how you respond to people. And it's constant, especially during this time. It is constant. But the trick is to keep in your mind the thing that God is working with you on. If you can, it's much, much easier to go through this refining process. So here's the 5 acts that are done to the grain. They used to thresh it. Then it was put in a copper tube and burned or parched or roasted so that the fire should prevail throughout the grains. Sorry, it was reaped and then threshed, and then fire prevailing through every grain, and then let the wind blow over it. Now this is what we're going to talk about today. This is the teacher, and they put it in a grist mill and remove from it a tenth. The grist mill is God, it is not people, and so it goes from grain to flour. Once that takes place, then the last one can take place, which is sifting, which is next week. That's the apostle. So you have harvesting, threshing, roasting, winnowing, and sifting, and these are what fill the measure. This little tiny, what is it? 2.2 liters, or 2 dry quarts. Half a gallon. Thank you. Half a gallon is an Omer. Right around that. And those correspond to the 5 matanot, or gifts. The evangelist goes out with the scythe and cut it down. The pastor is the thresher that threshes once it's brought into the house. They gently thresh it to remove the heads from the stalks. And then the prophet is the fire that roasts every grain. And now this week is the teacher. Now I've been teaching wrong a little bit. I'm going to clean it up. The words for office is totally different from gift. Even up to this week, and I've been teaching about this, even up to this week, there are still people who are listening to the teachings who are mixing gifts. You cannot say that person is a pastor / teacher. That person is an apostle / teacher. That person is an evangelist / prophet. There is no such thing. That's why we have offices. I am an apostle. That is my gift. It was from before I was born. When I was born, I was an apostle. I came out with the umbilical cord wrapped twice around my neck as an apostle. And my whole life I've been an apostle. I just didn't know it. But I have filled the office of pastor, of teacher, of evangelist, and of prophet. But that doesn't make me an apostle. It doesn't make me a teacher and a prophet or any of those. I'm still an apostle. Now, the word for office I've been saying is sarah or sarim. It's true. But if you say, the proper way to say it is misrad. Misrad. They still have this word in Israel. Like all the different offices, they just say it's a misrad. And it comes from the word sarah. Sar, which is officer. So a misrad is an office. Please try to separate the office from the gift. The matan, the gift. Not misrad. So are you an evangelist, a pastor, a prophet, a teacher, or an apostle? And you need to figure it out. You need to find out which one you are. Now, this picture is the teacher. Got his nose in the book. That's the teacher. Got their nose in the book. Now, Deuteronomy 17, 8 through 11 is By the way, I had a real hard time finding a verse that is like the motivation of the teacher. I don't know that there is one, or two, or three. I don't know. But this one kind of tells the process of how God set it up. If any case is too difficult for you to decide, being cases of dispute in your courts, then you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. You shall come to the Levitical priest or judge. You shall inquire, and they shall declare to you the verdict. In the case, you shall do according to the verdict which they declare, according to all that they teach you, the terms of the Torah that they teach you. So, these were the teachers. We're going to talk about this. The dissemination of Torah, of the doctrine, of instruction, was done in a very specific way. The teachers were the priests and Levites, or judges, elders. So you could have priests, you could have Levites, or you could have elders that would teach. They'd teach the Torah. This is how it was disseminated. Now that doesn't mean that 100,000 people in Israel weren't teachers from birth. It just means that those were filling the office, the misrad of the teacher. And they acted out, because they were filling the office, they acted out how a teacher functions. Well, how are they going to do this? How are the teachers going to do this? You go up to a teacher in the gate and you say, oh, we got this horrible problem. This guy killed this guy, and there's a problem with the witnesses, and we don't know what to do. Okay, here's what you do. It doesn't work that way. They would stick their nose in the book, and they would seek the Lord, and they would study, 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 study. And then they would give the verdict. This is why there's so many... Jews are not going to like this statement, by the way. This is why there's so many Jewish people that are lawyers. Why do you think that happened? Because we love the law? No, because God set it up for us to be engaged in the books and to learn the, quote, law, or the instruction, the Torah. That's why there's so many lawyers. All right, so here's the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about winnowing, is the act of separating. That's what the teacher does. They separate. They bring division. They bring division in doctrine. Winnowing was God judging. And I'm going to show you that it was a corrective process. That God winnowing meant that he was disciplining. He was correcting. Torah was taught by God, and then it was taught by Moses, and then it was taught by Levites, and then it was taught by all the Jewish parents. This is the dissemination of the Torah. And then the teachers chastise, train, correct, discipline, sharpen, and pierce. This is what I didn't know. I thought I knew about the teacher. I knew some. But this is what I was missing. I never looked up all the words for teacher in Hebrew. I thought there was one, maybe two. But there's three. And they mean these weird, hard, harsh things. Correct. Well, chastise, train, correct, discipline, sharpen, and pierce. That's the job of the teacher. I'm a school teacher. I fill that office, that misrad, in my life, in public. It's not my gift. But I've noticed that the good teachers, the ones who were actually teachers, who were like obsessed with the details, who get their nose in the book and keep it there, they're hard. They're harsh. They're like really, they're always chastising the students. They're always disciplining the students. The teacher's drive is information, details. That's why they got their nose in the book, because that's what they like. That's what drives them. I was talking to a teacher yesterday, and I said to him, I was reading a portion in my book that said, teacher's motivation is information. And he says, yeah, that's right, because he's a teacher. When he said that, he kind of put a nail in the coffin of the problem of the teacher, which we're going to talk about. But he said, yeah, absolutely. That information is what it's all about for the teacher. It's not like that for all the gifts, just the teacher. Teachers have a magical ability with numbers and letters, gematria. This is what I knew about teachers, which is really magical. It's really amazing. Something I cannot do. Teachers separate good doctrine from bad doctrine. There's that separating. The kingdom and Judaism are the teachers. The kingdom and Judaism are the teachers. That is what God gave us to teach us. That's the curriculum. That's the teachers and the curriculum and the classroom. Everything about God is taught through Judaism, not through Christianity. I'm sorry to say, but this is the truth. See my smile? See how nice I'm being? It is the truth. But Judaism is what God gave us to teach about him, not Christianity. So teachers should reflect that. Teachers should be the Indiana Jones of the Bible. This is kind of the bottom line of the teaching that I finally figured out. And then teachers should link up with pastors, because pastors are obsessed with empathy. They feel so much. Teachers do not. All right, so let's start talking about winnowing. Winnowing is this process. You get a shovel, you throw the grain up in the air all day long, and you make these big giant piles of good grain. And then the chaff gets blown by the wind, gets blown into another pile. So you can see these huge piles of grain. That's the actual grain. And then they're throwing it up in the air, and then this is a good pile of grain. This is the good stuff. That's the heads without the chaff, because the chaff has been blown away. And they do this all day long. Well, that's a pretty violent, separative act. And it's just separating one substance from another. That's all they do. And that is the job of the teacher. So you have to know what winnowing is. You have to know what a winnowing fork is. Now there's one problem, and that's with the King James Version. That in the King James Version, it calls it a winnowing fan. So it was very confusing to me. I couldn't figure out, what is winnowing? Is it a fan, or is it a shovel? I don't get it. And I looked at pictures, and I read winnowing fan. I hardly ever read the King James, but I did come across it. And I would read King James, and I'd see winnowing fan. I'm like, where's the fan? What fan? The wind is what blows it. So is there a guy with a fan if there's no wind? What it's saying, it's calling this fork, this pitchfork type thing, it calls that a fan in the King James. It is not that in Greek, and it's not that in Hebrew. So, to clear that up, it's a fork. A winnowing fork. And then you need to know what chaff is, and you need to know that separating is their main duty. Now let's talk about winnowing. What is winnowing? Winnowing, you saw the physical, but what is it spiritually? Here's what it is spiritually. Proverbs 20:26. A wise king winnows the wicked, separates the wicked, and drives the threshing wheel over them. We talked about threshing. That was the pastor. A wise king winnows the wicked. So like they throw them up in the air, and the garbage gets blown away, and the good grain drops. So I assume what that means is the pile, the heap of good grain, are the good people in the kingdom. And the king has the ability to say, get that guy out of here. He's chaff. So I knew there had to be scripture that said that bad guys are chaff. Evil people are chaff. Wicked people are chaff. It does say that. We'll see that. You will winnow them. Isaiah 41:16 says, you, God, will winnow them, and the wind will carry them away, and the storm will scatter them. But you will rejoice in the Lord, and you will glory in the Holy One of Israel. So when God makes that separation by his wind, when he makes that separation and the wind blows away the chaff and the good people drop, then you'll rejoice because you only have good people there. And Israel is filled with good people, not wicked people mixed in. There's no mixture. Jeremiah 15:7. I will winnow them with a winnowing fork at the gates of the land. Now this is Jeremiah talking to Israel, when Babylon is coming to take them away. And he says that basically that winnowing fork, that's Babylon. That God is going to use the people of Babylon, the attacking army of Babylon, as the winnowing fork to separate the good from the bad. So God says, I will winnow them with a winnowing fork at the gates of the land. I will bereave them of children. I will kill their children. That's winnowing. That's harsh. I will destroy my people. And he calls it winnowing. Now what you're going to see is that the job of the teacher, that teaching is correction. And here's something that most people do not know about God. It took me years to figure this out. That God doesn't punish. We're not supposed to punish. We're supposed to correct. It's called in Hebrew musar. It means correction, spanking. We're supposed to do that. But when it's done, it's not supposed to punish the person. Punishment is what the whole Christian history has been filled with. Stocks, clapped in irons, clapped in the stocks, flayed, have burning hot oil poured down your mouth. How does this correct it? How does this teach anybody anything? Crucifixion, burning at the stake, drawn and quartered. This is what they got, the Christian Europe. This is what they got from the Bible saying punish. So they came up with every way they could to punish people. But that's not how it is in the scriptures. There's correction. Now, even something this harsh, bereaving Israel of their children, destroying his people, that's correction. In Leviticus, I think it's chapter 27, it says 4 times, it's talking about the birth pangs. It's talking about Babylonians coming and destroying Judah, and then Hitler's Germany, and then the birth pangs in the day of the Lord. Worse and worse and worse. It just gets worse and worse and worse for Israel unless they repent. Well, in that passage it says, if you don't repent, I will strike you 7 times more. The way it translates it is punish. I will punish you 7 times. And so everybody has no problem thinking, okay, it's a Holocaust. Even the Holocaust was correction. It was not punishment. God does not punish his children. He corrects them. He chastises them. Now, it's harsh. Even the birth pangs is not punishment for Israel. It's correction. So I want to make that clear, that these horribly harsh things, if it's coming from God, is not punishment, it's correction. I will destroy my people. They did not repent of their ways. And that is winnowing. Jeremiah 51:2. I will dispatch foreigners to Babylon, that Babylon may winnow her, Israel, and may devastate her land. For on every side they will be opposed to her in the day of calamity. That's the birth pangs, in the day of the Lord. Was also Babylon as a rehearsal of that. So he says, I will dispatch Babylon to winnow Israel. They were the winnowing fork. Matthew 3:11-12. I, John, immerse you in water, but he who comes after me will immerse you in the Holy Spirit and fire. And his winnowing fork, now this is where it says in King James, fan, his winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clear his threshing floor. That doesn't mean like get everything off the threshing floor. What that means is clear it of garbage, so that there's only good stuff left. Now that's John talking about Yeshua, that Yeshua will come and winnow Israel, so that there will be good grain, a heap of good grain on the threshing floor of Israel, and get rid of all the chaff. He will gather the grain into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. That's what winnowing is. Now here's a dissemination of teaching. Like God said, some of you are going to be teachers. All right? How do we do that? What do we do? For a teacher, what do we do? Well, I'll give you a pattern. Here's the pattern. I'm going to teach, then he's going to teach, then they're going to teach, then they're going to teach. You are to speak to him. This is God talking. God says to Moses, you are to speak to Aaron, to him, put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and his mouth, and I will teach you what you are to do. Now, nobody on this planet has a hard time believing that God said, and I'll command you what to do. He did not say that. It's the word yoreh, which we'll talk about, which is teach. It's the main word for teach. I will teach you, Moses, what you are to do, not command you. And then Moses, since God taught him, then he taught Israel. Now Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you. Now this is a different word. This is lamed. Lamed. This is the second most common word for teaching, teacher, student. A student is a talmid. Melamed is a teacher. And to teach is lamed, the word lamed, which I teach you to do, so that you may live and go in and take possession. So in Deuteronomy 4, leading up to the Shema, in 2 chapters later, in chapter 4 he says, listen to the statutes and the judgments. Don't listen to God. Don't listen to me. Listen to the statutes and the judgments themselves that I teach you. So this is a totally different process from what people think. That God commands it, and I will dutifully obey it. And that's where it stops. The teacher is critical and key to this true process, which is breaking it down into its details so that it can be done, and then each detail listened to. If we didn't have teachers, if we didn't have Moshe to do it, and then teachers to do it, all we would have is, I command you to do it, yes sir, I'll do it. That's what we'd be left with. But we're not. Because God never said command, he never said obey, he said teach. That's a teaching for another time, which I've done several times. There's no such thing as command, and there's no such thing as obey. If you want to really learn about that, get my teaching on Tzav, the Torah portion Tzav. All right, so after Moshe taught Israel, then Israel's to teach their children. This is in the Shema. This freaked me out. I've said this twice a day, every day, for 35 years, something like that. And I never thought about what I was saying, at least in one word. Hear, O Israel, listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. These words, well, I'll say it. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And these words which I set up for you today shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. It's not the word teach. In fact, if you look it up in Strong's Concordance, it has it underlined, and usually in Strong's Concordance, it'll underline a word and then have a number, and you can look up the number. It doesn't even have a number because they don't agree that it's the word teach. But it does say teach, but it's a strange word, shanan. V'shanan. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol lebavcha uv'kol nafshecha uv'kol me'odecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavacha hayom alavavecha. So, V'shinantam levanecha. V'shinantam. And you shall teach levanecha, your children. Shinantam. Shanan. What is shanan? What is that? It's a strange word. Diligently to your children. And here's where the rubber really hits the road. This is where you can really see the job of the teacher. And we're going to go over this word shanan. You're going to see. But Israel is supposed to do this to all their children. And then, now that all of Israel has been taught, there's going to be problems that come up. Confrontations, court cases, problems with interpretation, problems with doctrine, problems with interpersonal relationships. And so, the Levites, that means the priests and the rest of Levi, the tribe of Levi, were to teach all of Israel. In Leviticus 10, 9 through 11, Aaron, God is talking to Aaron. He says, do not drink wine or strong drink when you come into the tabernacle, when you come into the temple, when you come into God's space. You or your sons, when you come into the tent of meeting. When it says you or your sons, that means all of the tribe of Levi. And so as to teach the sons of Israel. Now this is again the word yoreh, just like this first one, yoreh, the name word for teaching. You shall teach the sons of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them through Moshe. And here is the problem with Messianic Judaism, Christianity, Hebrew Christianity. Here's the problem that we've had. Now, I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm saying this is the huge problem that we've been carrying around for 2,000 years. We have believed that God said, I will command you to do this, and you diligently and dutifully snap a salute and say, yes, sir, I love you. Never was that God's plan. Never. The plan was figure out the details. Disseminate it to your children, listen to them, and thereby you will come to know me. This is why we don't know God. Messianic Judaism, standard Christianity, Hebrew Christianity. This is why we don't know God. Because we've been carrying this false belief that God is not a teacher, he's a commander. But he's not. He's a teacher. That means there's got to be a classroom. That means there's got to be curriculum. That means there's got to be a way to teach. But for the most part, that hasn't been. Now we got another problem on top of that. John chapter 1 or 2, can't remember. It's talking about John, and it says, they were talking to John and they said, Rabbi. And then in parentheses it says, Rabbi means teacher. No, it does not. Ravi means my high one, my respected one. I'm showing you respect. I am humbling myself to you because you're great. That's what rabbi means. Ravi, my high one, it's just in lifestyle and culture and the schema of Judaism that it, quote, means rabbi. But you cannot take that at face value. It's not what it means. It means rabbi. It means teacher. But it doesn't. In the culture, it means teacher. Here's a rabbi teaching kids. It's called a rabbi. My high one. My respected one. Now, here's the words for teach, and then we'll look at the words for teacher. There's three of them. Yare or yore. Yara or yore. And then lamad, and then shanan, the weird one. Yore means to lay foundation. I love that. I love it. To lay foundation. Basics. Now, how are you going to know the basics to lay unless you're this? Unless you got your nose in the book. Nobody studies anymore. You know, when I first came to the Messiah, people used to study. They used to get their nose in the book and just spend a lot of time there studying. They don't do that anymore. They don't even carry Bibles. And you know, it's important to have an actual physical book. There's a huge difference between looking at a screen and flip-flopping back and forth things and knowing where to find something in the book. What page is it on? What paragraph is it in? Where is it in the book? What words is it next to? The world has pretty much lost that ability, which is very sad. It is very important to read it in the book, in a scroll, to see the letters. But that's being lost. Well, that's foundational. And it means to sprinkle with water. Yara, yore, means to flow, to sprinkle with water. It means water coming out. But it also means to shoot, to be shot through, like an arrow. To cast, to throw something. And archer, it's the same word for archer. To send out the hand. To point. To indicate. This is my opinion and my opinion only. When I sit in a church, and there was times I've done that, when I sit in a church, this is what I see. I see a shotgun with thousands of pellets coming out, going everywhere. There's no specificity. When I sit in a synagogue or a temple, or, even better than that, like a Hasidic teacher, it's like a laser beam. And they stay on that until you get it. There's a huge difference. That's Yoreh. That laser beam, that arrow, going right for the target, the bullseye of the target. That's Yoreh. Not, I read something really cool. It's about this, I think, and that's not Yoreh. That's not teaching. There's no specificity to it. Now, the word lamad. Oh, by the way, I picked this picture because of the eyes on the face of the children, which I'm going to talk about. We're getting closer to it. Lamad, to chastise, to train, to correct, to discipline. This is what lamad means in its root. To discipline, to instruct, to learn or accustom oneself to something. A disciple, a learner, one taught. A disciple is the same word as discipline. I mean, I'm a disciple of Yeshua, but I'm a disciple maybe 10% of the time. When there's discipline, when I'm disciplined about it. We're only disciples if we're being disciplined. If we're being, acting and reading and studying and living it out in a disciplined manner. Or else we're not talmidim, disciples. We're just, in class. There's a lot of people like that in my classes. One person is a disciple, I can tell them anything. And they fear me, like these kids. They fear this guy. They have awe and respect for him. They fear him. They know that he has the power to give them a bad grade, to talk to their parents, to discipline them, to get them to think differently. He has the power to change their life. So they fear him. And that's good. There's kids that I have like that, and they'll do what I say. I say, hang from the chandelier and spit nickels. And they say, how much money do you want? Come out. That's a disciple. Other than that, they're just in class. I got a lot of people like that. But I think it's amazing that the actual root of the word is hard. It's hard. And then the third one, shanan, which they don't even translate as teach, or at least Strong's doesn't even have a word for it in Hebrew, because they don't even translate it as teach. It means to sharpen. It means a sword. It means the tongue. To assail with the tongue with sharp sayings. This is the job of the teacher. A sharpened weapon. It means wounded or pierced. My rabbis that I had in Messianic Judaism never did this to me. Very, very rarely. They would, I would get disciplined about my behavior and this and that, but they never disciplined me as a teacher and taught me Judaism and said, why are you doing this? The Torah says, the rabbis say, they never did this to me because they didn't know it. But when I went to Temple Mount Sinai here in El Paso for 11 years, my mild, kind, loving, gentle, tree-hugging, New Age rabbi did this to me. He did this to me. He shananed me. It's the first time I ever experienced it. I loved it. I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it, which is why I stayed so long. And remember, this is the word that's used. This is the word that's used. And you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall pierce. You shall wound. You shall assay with sharp sayings diligently to your children. What do you think of that? They teach diligently They translate that from shanan. V'shinantam levanecha, and you shall assail with sharp sayings. You shall pierce. You shall wound with the sword your children. That's how you teach. And here's the thing. Nobody wants to be taught like this. Nobody. But this can be done with a smile. It can be done kindly. It can be done without losing your sense of who you are as a person. You know, and how nice you are, and all the crap you've gone through. And all the horrors that have come to your life that have changed you. It's hard to hang on to that. But it can be done. And when you talk to other people and you assail them with hard sayings, this is best, Gamaliel said, and Hillel said, with a smile. It's done best with a smile, so you don't forget. Now, I guarantee, this guy's got a little bit of a smile going on in that picture. I don't know if you can see that, but that's how it is in Judaism. It's hard. I mean, it is. It's not like, oh, brother, let's just fellowship together and sing some pretty songs and have a good time and let's bless one another. This is why the church hates Judaism. And this is not my opinion. This is easy to see. This is why the church hates Judaism. Judaism is not a feather. It's a sword. But it's done with a smile. Jews are the happiest, funniest people on the planet. But they're hard. We're hard. We're intense. I just teach art in a public school. You know, there's nothing spiritual about that. But it always is spiritual when I'm teaching. And invariably, one of the kids will say to me, "Chill, mister, chill." And I say, "No, that's not my job. My job's not to chill." And I know what I'm doing. And I do it, happily and nicely. I do it with a smile. But I always tell them, "No, my job's not to chill, buddy. Get on it. Get busy. Come on, let's go." I light a fire on them. That's shanan. It's also lamad. So, now the words for teacher come from these words, obviously, except for one of them. There's 3 words for teacher. More comes from yara. It's just somebody who does that, who shoots like a laser beam, an archer. To lay foundation, to flow, to show, to point, to indicate. Melamed, to chastise, to train, to correct, to discipline, to instruct. And then, here's the one that doesn't appear. Maven. Maven. This is in, we'll see it in a moment. I think it's in Ezra. Maven. It comes from being, or vin. It means to distinguish or separate. Isn't that interesting? To separate. How about that? And that's literally the root of the word. It means to separate. And that's the job of the teacher. To wound, to instruct, to chastise, to discipline, to accost with words of the mouth, to say sharp sayings, to be a sharpened weapon, and to separate. All right, that sounds bad. That sounds harsh. That's the job of the teacher. And I didn't want to teach on this because everybody knows what a teacher is. No, we don't. I don't think really anybody knows what a teacher is. This is the job of the teacher. So they're hard. They're harsh. They're cut and dry. They're mean. They are. They don't care about us. They care about the information. But they're the perfect people to do this if they can figure out how to do it. They've got something that we don't have that allows them to do all this stuff. That the rest of us gifts don't have this, what they've got. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So here's where the word teacher is used, at least a few of them. God is exalted in his power, who is a teacher, a moreh like him. God is a moreh. He's not a commander. He's a moreh. Psalm 119:99. I have more insight than all my teachers, David says. All my melamed, my teachers. For your testimonies are my meditation. David was disciplined, corrected, chastised, trained, instructed, taught. That happened to David, and he recognized it. Proverbs 5:13. I just had a thought that I feel like I need to say. Some of you have been taught by me, and you didn't like it. You thought, gosh, he's a rabbi. He should be kind to me. I did it with a smile. Every single thing every time that I have disciplined, I'm talking about in my life recently. I'm not talking about in the past. In the past, I was a jerk. I didn't care. I didn't know how to do it. I know how to do it now. I'm talking to those people that I have taught in the last, I'll say, 3 years. I always do it with a smile. You have to recognize, like David did, that I'm a melamed. I'm there to correct, to chastise. I'm there to say sharp sayings. That's my job if I'm filling that office. So, be like David. He says it, and then he says, I have more insight than those guys who melamed, who chastised me and instructed me. For your testimonies are my meditation. Proverbs 5:13, I have not listened to the voice of my teachers, my moreh, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. I think we can say that. I think all of us can say that. The guy was, a moreh, was pointing out, he was like a laser beam, and I didn't like it. I didn't like when she did that, so I didn't listen. I think we should all admit that. Isaiah 30:20, although the Lord has given you the bread of privation and water of oppression, He, God, your moreh, will no longer hide Himself, but your eyes will behold your moreh. That's Yeshua. That's the Messiah. Your eyes will see your teacher, your moreh. So because God was a moreh, Yeshua was a moreh. You never see Him as a moreh in movies. Ever. You see Him as a gentle, Hellenistic, long-haired, girl boy, God-man. You never see Him as a true rabbi, ever. Somebody who's like a laser beam. They'll throw in a scene of Him turning over tables in the temple. They'll do that, and then He's yelling a little bit. They'll do that. But you never see Him teaching Israel like a teacher, like a melamed or a moreh. Ezra 8:16. This is that verse I told you about where the word mevinim is. It's the only one I could find. Then I sent for Eliezer, Zechariah, Meshulam, chief men, also for Yoyarib and Elnatan, who were teachers. Now, I thought it would be the word melamed, maybe moreh, but it wasn't. It was something completely different. This word mevinim, which comes from bin, which means to separate. That's all it means. To distinguish, to separate. And that's what these guys were. They were really good at separating the details. And this is what teachers do. They stick their nose in the book, they figure out the details. Not just with Bible, but with anything, with everything. So here's something I wrote in when all the pictures are restored under the teacher section of Counting the Omer. The teacher loves the details of the doctrines. This gift is like a dart heading for the bullseye of the dartboard. He or she checks everything in the texts, in the books, in the literature of their field. In the case of Scripture, they examine carefully to separate good doctrine from bad. Nobody does this in Hellenism. It is not done in Hellenism. It's not supposed to be done in Hellenism. It is the opposite of Hellenism, but it's the foundation of Judaism. They are driven by a desire for knowledge. They want to understand everything, and thus the teacher is driven into a quest for fact. If led by the Spirit, the teacher can read the same passage in the Bible that others are reading and come up with some amazing revelations that no one else could possibly see. I've seen this happen many times, by the way. A word may leap from the pages to them and relate with another passage somewhere else in a seemingly unrelated way. Yet in reality, it's deeply connected. And in braiding them together, a totally different facet of doctrine is instantly and dramatically discovered. If a teacher knows Hebrew, a whole new world will be opened up. And if a teacher is familiar enough with that Hebrew, he or she can actually make quick recognitions and relationships between different words based solely on the numerical equivalence of the letters. This is called gematria. I believe that God embedded the gematria into the Bible, and the teacher has a supernatural ability to draw it out. When I say supernatural, I'm not kidding. I am telling you that I have sat in a group with up to 25 people. All the gifts were there, present, and all the people knew what their gift was. A passage comes up, it's presented before us, and we're all dealing with it, wrestling with it, seeing different things, and you know, kind of like sucking on a giant lollipop. Everybody gets, you know, a different part of it, and we're all helping and blessing each other by seeing different portions. And then the teacher opens their mouth, and we all go, "Say what? Where did that come from?" I've seen this happen many times. And here's the reason. The gematria is buried. It's embedded in there. And you can only find it if you go, one of two things. If you go digging for it, or if the Holy Spirit just shows it to you. It's the only way it can happen. Now, the last paragraph says, if the teacher has some practice at being led by the Spirit, it is even possible for them to combine, rearrange, and recombine letters, that's okay, and words, and even whole phrases. I couldn't do this if you paid me $1 million. My mind can't deal with it. My mind can't handle that much different information being rearranged. I can't do it. I can't juggle 15 balls at the same time. I just can't do it. But a teacher can. It is a magical thing to see. And they arrive at some very astounding and biblical sound doctrines. There was a book put out maybe at the beginning of 2001, 2, 3, something like that, called the Bible Code. Bible Codes. Phenomenal, amazing book. And it deals, I'm not good at talking about this because I need a teacher to interpret this. It's dealing with letter skips. Like if you have an aleph, where's the next aleph, and the next aleph, and the next aleph? Or if you have my name, Michael, where do you have the mem? And then where's the next shortest space where there's a yod, me? And then where's the shortest space where there's a chaf, cha? And then where's the shortest space where there's an aleph? And then the shortest space where there's a lamed? And you throw it into a program, a computer program, and it spits out a grid of letters that you cannot read. It's just letters of a passage. And there's no divisions, there's no punctuation, and it's skipping letters. So it's giving you the closest area where those letters skip. Like if you put in Mikhail Varshavsky in the Bible and you do the closest letter skips, it will tell everything about my life. And it'll do the same thing for you. I couldn't do this if you paid me $1 million. I just can't do it. I don't think like this. But these guys who wrote these books, Bible Code, and then Bible Code 2 is one I have, by Michael Drosnin, it's phenomenal. This is what it looks like. It's just grids of letters that mean nothing. But if you put them together, they spell things. They spell everything, all the information about the subject that you are looking for. I've seen Gentile teachers, not Jewish, I've seen it with Jews too, but I've seen Gentile teachers, and here's the word of encouragement. Do this. It kind of appears before them, and the letters dance around, and they go, hey, that phrase that you just looked at has the same numerical equivalent in Hebrew as some passage that is completely unrelated, and they mean the same thing. These are not Torah scholars. These are just Gentiles who learned a little Hebrew. But I've seen them do it. So I know this is real. I've lived it. When we had Derech Olam, my first congregation, this is one of the things I think I got right. That there were teachers that were actually working in their gift that could do this, and it blew us away. So, thank you teachers out there that hung out with me in Derech Olam and showed me that this is possible. But this is how it works. Here's how the teacher functions and thinks. Now we're going to talk about winnowing, and remember it says that the good grain drops and the chaff is blown away. Well, what's it blown away by? It's blown away by wind. What is wind? Wind is doctrine. So that means there's bad doctrine and there's good doctrine. And I'm going to say at the outset that a lot of believers believe a lot of bad doctrine. The biggest one is replacement theology. It is from hell. It is demonic. That Israel was replaced by the church. That is demonic. And it is the foundational teaching for, I would say, 80% of the standard normative church. That's changing, thank God. But that has been the foundation of 100% of the standard normative church up until recently. So, let's talk about wind as doctrine. The very first one is the passage that the 5 gifts comes from, Ephesians 4. As a result of the gifts, we are no longer to be children tossed here and there by waves, carried around by every wind of doctrine. I know you've heard this phrase, wind of doctrine, from Ephesians chapter 4. Now you know what it is. We're going to talk about it. It's from the Torah. It's from the Tanakh. Job 6:25 through 26. How painful are honest words. That's a teacher. The laser beam. The shanan. The words coming out. Lamed. The words coming out to damage. How painful are honest words. But what does your argument prove? Do you intend to rebuke my words when the doctrine of someone in despair are wind? Doctrine is wind. Job 8:1 through 2. Bildad the Shuhite responded and said, how long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Now this has been, mushed down and watered down into, he's just blowing hot air. That's where that comes from. No, it's doctrine. It's important. What we say is important. It's not just nonsense. Job 21:17 through 18. How often is the lamp of the wicked snuffed out? How often does calamity come upon them? How often are they like the straw, the chaff, before the wind, like chaff swept away by the gale? This is people. People are chaff, swept away by the wind. Psalm 1:1 through 4. Blessed is the man. He is like a tree planted by streams of water. The wicked are not so. They're like chaff that the wind blows away, like chaff swept away by the gale. So chaff is doctrine, and it's also people, because it's coming out of the people. The teacher has the ability to separate between the two. Here's something else I wrote in the Pictures Restored book, but this is in the Pictures chapter, under the heading, Torah, the Friendly Tutor. Now, you know that, if you've watched me for any amount of time, you know that my whole focus is the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom, the day of the Lord, and how to see it and how to understand it, which is only by pictures. That everything in Judaism is a picture, a shadow cast by Messiah. That's my whole deal. I'm a one-trick pony. So in that chapter on pictures, I say this. Remember the basics of the Torah, the kosher laws, the new moon, the festivals, and the Shabbat. It is these things that give us faith or understanding. That's what faith means in Judaism. It's understanding. They are tutors. Well, what's a tutor? What's a tutor? A tutor is a teacher. Now, what I'm dealing with here is a verse in Galatians that says that the law, the Torah, was the tutor to lead us to Messiah. Christians read that and they say, oh, see, we don't need the Torah anymore because we have Christ. Not what it says. It means that all of the Torah is a tutor that leads us to Messiah constantly, every day, all the time. So the Torah is a tutor, a teacher. They are tutors that take us aside and give us a detailed explanation and understanding of the incomprehensible, what we cannot understand any other way. And once faith comes from these tutors, then they're no longer needed. We graduate. Our rank has increased and we've become mature in one aspect or another. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't storm away from the tutor, tear up the books, and burn down the school. We simply graduate from that very small, detailed class. That's all. There are countless other classes to take. That is the nature of studying the Torah. We read it every year, going over the same passages over and over again, yet every year there's another layer, another tutor, another revelation of the incomprehensible. That's why Judaism works. Because you just go over it and 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 over it, and every time you see a different thing taught to you in a different class. So the classroom never goes away. This is the class. This is the class. Judaism, the kingdom. Judaism itself is the class. It is the tutor. So if you have the gift of the teacher, this is what you're supposed to look like. The kingdom. Judaism. And as you do Judaism, you teach from it. If you wear tzitzit, you teach from it. If you wear a kippah, you teach from it. Your body, your life is supposed to look like this. And then when people ask, why is that? Why are you doing that? What is that about? Then you teach. And you don't teach, oh, well, let me explain to you. You teach pointed and hard and correcting, but with a smile. That smile is the hard part. Now, here's the nut of what I got finally this year about the teacher. You're supposed to be like the Indiana Jones of the Bible. There's stuff that the teacher can find that we will never find. I will never find as an apostle. I dig. I mean, I study. I really work hard to study. But a teacher can get the same result that I get in a 50th of the time and effort that I put in. I study like an apostle. I'm like a pit bull. I get fastened on and I don't let go. I just will not let go. And no matter what anybody says to me, I ain't gonna let go, because I got to get from point A to point B. And I'm stubborn and I'm tenacious and I'm hard about it. I'm hard on me and I'm hard on everybody else, because I got to get to that thing. Teachers aren't like that. Teachers, they go, there's this, and that leads me to this, and that leads me to this, and they're I don't know if you've seen those things on the internet, like a dictionary, a pictorial dictionary, where it'll have one word in the center, and then there's all these connecting tissues that go out and have other words, and then those connect to other tissue, and it's like 1,000 things all of a sudden. I can't do that. Evangelists cannot do that. Evangelists are shallow. They're supposed to be shallow. They have a simple message. Pastors can't do that. Pastors' job is about people. All they care about is people. And when they study Judaism, they do it in a completely different way. It's more people-oriented. It's more heart-oriented. When apostles study, I don't know if for everybody, but for me, when apostles study, it's about getting to order. It's about getting to people's hearts. How do you get them from point A to point B? How do you change them? How do you get them to see so they can change? That's how we think. Prophets, they don't care. It's like, that's what I saw. Here it is. Now they study. My wife is she's a good student of the scriptures, but she don't study like me. She is so intense and focused on that one picture, that one image, and all the things and all the effects that one image that she saw has. So that's how they study. Did I leave anybody out? Evangelist, pastor, prophet, teacher, apostle. That's everybody. Job 28. This is an amazing passage. I fell in love with this passage years ago, but I've never taught on it. I've never talked about it. Surely, and by the way, this is just a very, very small part of the whole passage. I'm not going to read the whole passage, the whole chapter. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place where they refine gold. Iron is taken from the dust, copper smelted from the rock. To the farthest limit man searches out. He sinks a shaft far from habitation. From the earth comes food underneath. It is turned up like fire. Its rocks are the source of sapphires, and its dust gold. He overturns the mountains at their base, looking for stuff, is what it's talking about. He dams up the streams from flowing, and what is hidden he brings out to the light. This is 1/10 of this passage, and it talks over and over about man will go to the farthest lengths to find silver and gold and corals and rubies and gems and jewels. They'll do all this to find this stuff. Where can wisdom be found? And the place of understanding. God wouldn't have that in the Bible if it wasn't like this to find wisdom and find understanding. We're supposed to go on a search. It's not handed to us on a silver platter. You don't sit back like a fat baby and have some dude give you stuff on the internet and you go, oh, I know the Lord so well. No, you don't. You know nothing. We're supposed to dig. Anything you get from God is because you dug and you searched for him. He says, search for me and I will allow you to find me. And I don't have that verse here on purpose. I want you to hear my words. He says, search for me diligently and I will allow you to find me. Anything we get from God is buried in the dirt. You have to go looking for it. It's like food. You don't just sit back and magically bread is formed on its own and kind of drops from a tree and you just stand there, oh, thank you, God. You got to make bread. You got to plant it and harvest it and bring it up and do all these processes to it to turn it into flour, and then you make bread. Anything we get from God, we have to go on a search for it. Well, the teacher can do this better than anybody. Why? Because they got their nose in the book. That's where they live. They carry around highlighters and pens and magnifying glasses and microscopes and they know how to do computer programs and they know how to do stuff like this book, which I couldn't do. I just can't do it. And I'm fairly intelligent. I can't do it. But the teacher can. They're like Indiana Jones. And they go on this adventure to find doctrine. Good doctrine. Who's done this in the church? Who's done this? Until, quote, Hebrew Christianity, quote, Messianic Judaism came along. Who did this in the church? They kept saying the same pablum over and over and over. And they dig on the Greek and the Hebrew and they come up with the same thing everybody's always said. They never brought us to the kingdom. So obviously, something's wrong. It's the doctrine. There's good doctrine and there's bad doctrine. And the bad doctrine is supposed to be separated out by the teachers to be blown away by the Spirit of God. That's what was supposed to happen. Proverbs 2, 1-5. Treasure my commandments within you. Make your ear attentive to wisdom. Incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry for discernment, cry, like beg God for discernment. Lift your voice for understanding. If you seek her, like seeking silver, and search for her, like you go out and you dig and you smelt copper, hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, guys, But if you don't know Judaism, you don't know God. You don't. If you haven't listened to the mitzvot, not listened to God, commanding a bunch of junk and obeying a bunch of junk, if you haven't listened to the mitzvot, to have them talk to you, you don't have the knowledge of God because you didn't seek it. It's cheap, it's easy. You go to church, you sit there, they tell you the same thing. You don't know, you don't have the knowledge of God. You don't know God. You may be married, but you don't ever have sex. Isaiah 33, 5 through 6. The Lord is exalted, he dwells on high. He has filled Zion with justice and righteousness, and he will be the stability of your times, a wealth, money. You heard of mammon? That's the word in Hebrew, matmon. Wealth of Yeshua, of salvation, which is wisdom and knowledge. And the fear of the Lord is his treasure. Have you gone after that? Have you gone after that? Or do you just, you're a teacher in the church and you teach? What are you teaching? I'm teaching what I've been shown by my denomination. I've been teaching what the Holy Spirit has shown me. Well, does it comport with the good doctrine of Judaism? You, if you're a teacher, have the ability to figure this out. Better than me. Way better than me. So I would encourage you to do it. If you're a teacher, if you love the details, get your nose in the book and let Judaism teach you. Matthew 13:44, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and then hid. He found it, he dug it, he went on the search and he dug for it, and he found, oh, I found it! And then he goes and he hides it. Why? Because it's his. It belongs to him now, and he sticks it in there deep, and he hides it. And from joy over finding that, he goes and he sells everything he has to buy that field. Why the field? Because that's where the treasure was. What's the field? It ain't the world. In this case, it's God's field, where the wisdom is. It's Judaism. Judaism. The ways of Judah. God is known in Judah. In Israel, his name is great. Psalm 72, I think it is, or 74. Noda bihuda Elohim. God is known in Judah. That's the field. It's Judaism. If you want to know God, you got to go to the field where he is. Now the teacher has the ability to go on these amazing, weird journeys in Gematria, in the Hebrew, in the Greek too, it's confirmed stuff, but the Hebrew, the root, the foundation. Adventures in all the books of Judaism, the words of the sages, in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Midrash, in all the words of the rabbis for the last 2,000 years and before, to go on an adventure and find for us good doctrine. Remember, it's moreh, melamed, meben. To lay foundation, to flow, to show, to point, to indicate, to shoot with an arrow, to chastise, to train, to correct, to discipline, to instruct, to distinguish, to separate. Now here's something else I wrote in the Pictures Restored book. And here is, I'm going to present the pitfall of the teacher and the antidote. The attitude of the teacher can be cold and uncaring. Why? It's the information they're after. They don't care about the people. They care about the information. It's the information that's important. Give me the information. I got to have that information. It's the information. Who cares about you? It's the information. That's hard, man. That's a hard way to live. It is. It can make the person cold and uncaring. In this personality trait, they are the opposite of the pastor, because the teacher's primary concern is the facts, the knowledge about the sheep, rather than the sheep themselves. Facts alone can be devastatingly unmerciful. Facts don't leave room for feeling and loving earnestly and selflessly. As Rabbi Shaul said, the letter, that means the literal word, the written stuff, taking it, in its strictest form, it kills. People used to quote this to me all the time. But they were quoting it to me because I was a jerk. And they were right. But some people quoted it to me because I was talking Jewish stuff. Don't you know that the letter of Judaism kills, but the Spirit gives life? That's how they meant it. And when they did that, I let them have it with both barrels. Because it's wrong. But the ones who rebuked me because I was a jerk, and they said, you're being too restrictive, you're being too literal. The Spirit the literal word kills, but the Spirit mixed with the Torah gives life. And that's what Paul was meaning in 2 Corinthians. He was talking about mixing it with the Torah, with doctrine. This is the major problem that the teacher will always struggle with. To discover the truth, to uncover every secret of what makes things work, what makes things tick, to find out why things are the way they are, to reveal what motivates and drives things, and how things are put together. It's a fantastic goal. But if that drive is not tempered with compassion for people, it will do nothing to remove the bad doctrine, either from the body or from anyone personally, for that matter. And that's the problem. Information, science. I believe in science. Science is, information's fantastic. It's great. But if it's not mixed with compassion for others, with kindness, with at least some seichel, some sense of who you're talking to, if they're your friends, or just having a sense of yourself. Don't lose a sense of yourself. That's the trick. And I know, because I did it for 13 and a half years. I lost a sense of who I was in relationship to the people. I would give them, and I'm not a teacher, but I do it like an apostle, which is almost as bad. Can be worse in some cases. But I would give the information, and I was focused on getting them from point A to point B, and I ran right over them. And teachers can do this. It's the information. Can't you see the information? But the information. Yeah, but the information. And it can be hard, man. It can be really, really tough to deal with. That's why Jews teach the way they teach. That's why they do it the way they do it. They've found the right mixture. You stay focused on the information, the facts, the details. But you do it knowing what you're doing. To train, to chastise, to educate, to get people the understanding so they can change. So it's got to be done with some seichels and some compassion, some rachmanis. It's got to be done with some compassion with people. Now that's where the pastor comes in. In my opinion, this is my opinion. I've just, seen it work. So this is what I believe. Teachers should seek out pastors. Teachers should get hooked up with pastors so that the pastor can say, yeah, I think you should be, they'll say something motivated out of the person, the care for the person that they're saying it to. And they'll say, you were kind of harsh. I don't think you needed to do that. Well, I needed to do it because the information. Yeah, but you forgot them. They're wounded already. The shepherd can see the wound on the sheep, and they'll say, "Yeah, I can see, that sheep is wounded," and they'll spank the teacher. So this is that part's my opinion, but I do know this. I do know that the teacher, if not tempered with kindness, mostly kindness, they can be awfully devastating with the information, and it will only lead to more hurt. And it will not separate good from bad cleanly. It will not give a clean definition of this is good and this is bad, this is right and this is wrong. And so people can't follow it anyway. So the teacher is going to be ineffective if they're not kind. They're going to be ineffective of doing the one thing that they're good at, which is bringing out the details. So I would say go on an amazing treasure hunt, like Indiana Jones, and look for the treasure. Now I've written a very strange song. I say it's strange because it's in a major key. Major key is happy. Jewish music is always in a minor key. But I wrote a reggae song. This is called Look for Me as Treasure. Im tekach amarai titzbon itach itzvotai B'ni im tekach amarai titzbon itach itzvotai. If you take my words and establishments you treasure, you will be mine. Im hakasev tavachena hamadmonim tachpesena. Im hakasev tavachena hamadmonim tachpesena. For wisdom search as silver. If you look for me as treasure, you will be mine. And he shall be the stability of your time, the times of low, the wealth of salvation, wisdom and knowledge. His treasure is the fear of the Lord. The kingdom and glory, wisdom and knowledge, Torah and the Spirit here behold. Kingdom and glory, wisdom and knowledge, Torah and the Spirit here behold. Kind of a cool song. Gets the point across. And then we have the song that I'm adding to every week of the counting of the Omer, and linked with the 5 gifts. And this week I've added the teacher. Go out to the field to gather up the harvest. Grain so white and waiting, into my house arise. Get up high on a mountain, Zion never selling. Proclaim it here, here's your God, Mashiach is alive. Count the weeks times 7 as we come as one to Sinai. Come and see the glory of the all-consuming fire. Sirat HaOmer, fill the measure of Messiah. To each of us was given a gift to lift the body high. Who will thresh out all my grain with gentleness and mercy? Bind the wounds of all my broken-hearted and ignored. Shepherd, feel the feelings of those wandering on a mountain, carrying the lambs upon the shoulders of the Lord. Who will roast the heads of grain in my house of profit. Fire that burns, a fire of words, touch every single grain. Eyes that see into that day, by Yom Hahu, my kingdom, turning hearts in teshuvah and clinging to my name. Who will winnow in my house, remove the chaff in Zion, wind across the grain that drops as chaff is blown away. Teachers' doctrine separate the details of the Torah, the good and bad, the right and wrong of walking in my way. Count the weeks times 7 as we come as one to Sinai. Come and see the glory of the all-consuming fire. Spirat Omer, fill the measure of Messiah. To each of us was given a gift to lift the body high. To each of us was given a gift to lift the body high. So, Shabbat Shalom. If you're a teacher, go on that magical, mystical treasure hunt to find good doctrine from Judaism so you can give it to the rest of us in the body. Shabbat Shalom.